The crystal chandelier overhead cast down a cascade of light, dancing across the crystal wine glasses Clara was arranging. Her hands moved lightly, precisely as if performing a symphony in glass. Beneath her feet, the velvet carpet swallowed every step, no sound, no echo. A hand gripped the handle of the tray tightly. Clara subtly adjusted her ivory apron, glancing up through the glass walls, encircling the restaurant. The lush green of Central Park stretched out in the distance, gentle and cold, like a promise, not meant for her. A clink of silver cutlery against porcelain from a nearby table. The piano's notes drifted from the corner of the room, soft as an underground stream, weaving through conversations filled with hollow smiles. The scent of melted butter mingled with truffle and Chanel No. 5, lending the air a seductive yet alien allure. Clara nodded to a patron who ordered more wine, her lips curving into a perfect smile, neither too much nor too little. She turned away, the smile still fixed, though her heart tightened. A sharp ting from her phone in her pocket, a cut through the elegance, jarring and out of place. She stole a glance at the screen. A brief message from the babysitter. Lily's having trouble breathing again. Please remember to buy a new inhaler. Clara's throat went dry. Her hand tightened around the phone nails, digging into her skin. She inhaled deeply, holding the breath in her chest for a beat, then exhaled slowly. Not now. She couldn't falter. Not here. Just tonight, she told herself. Just one good shift, and the tips will cover 3 months of Lily's medication. She glided past a freshly plated beet salad, its deep red hue like velvet shimmering under the light. Cadmium red, she thought, the same color she used to paint with at Parsons. How long had it been since she last held a brush? She wasn't just a waitress, she had been an artist, someone who saw art in the light, filtering through a wine glass in the curve of silver cutlery. But now all that remained were hands, still striving to make everything beautiful, even if the world had forgotten she once had dreams. The pop of a wine cork from the bar startled her. Clara set the tray on the marble tabletop, lifting her gaze to the scene. Perfectly tailored suits, gleaming leather shoes, conversations where no one truly listened. And amidst it all was her Clara Evans, a single mother fighting through every shift to keep her daughter breathing. A faint breeze slipped through a crack in the glass door. Clara shivered, not from the cold, but from the raw feeling of looking outside. That city, glamorous, unyielding, wasn't hers, not yet. She lifted the tray, straightened her back, and kept moving, exhausted, heart heavy, with only a silent prayer in her soul. Lily, just wait for me a little longer. The elevator doors slid open with a sharp metallic ting. At first, there were only footsteps, but not the leisurely kind of the wealthy patrons, nor the sharp clicks of trophy wives in heels. No, these steps were firm, heavy, like someone was stomping on the marble floor, just to remind it who truly controlled the space. Julian Croft had arrived. He didn't enter the dining room, he stormed in, slicing through the atmosphere like a cold, sharp blade. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit, tailored to perfection, his navy tie knotted tight, like the collar of a general. No bodyguards, he didn't need them, but behind him trailed a younger man, with glasses, clutching a folder to his chest, probably a lawyer, judging by the nervous sweat already forming on his brow. A strange silence crept through the restaurant. The bartender froze mid-pour. A wine glass hit the table with just a little too much force. The server beside Clara, in the middle of taking an order, suddenly lowered her head as if she could disappear behind the menu. Matteo, the manager, usually so calm, it bordered on apathetic, suddenly adjusted his tie. It was already perfectly in place. Still, his hands smoothed it again, then tugged at his cuff, a reflex to soothe himself. Clara stood behind the counter, still trying to process what was happening when Matteo turned toward her. "Evans," he said, voice so low she had to lean in. "Table 6. Can you take it?" She frowned. "I thought that was Sarah's table." Matteo didn't answer immediately. A slow blink. He glanced toward the kitchen, where a few staff were in quiet chaos. Sarah slipped, scalded by boiling water. Had to rush her out. A beat of silence. Then Matteo looked at her. Not stern, not commanding, just pleading. "Save me on this one, Evans." Clara felt her heart pound hard in her chest. It was clear she was being thrown into a battle no one else dared enter. An opportunity and a minefield. She shot a quick glance toward table 6. Julian Croft was already seated, flipping through the menu like he was reviewing a stack of HR files. His face carried no expression except impatience. The Rolex on his wrist. Of course it was a Rolex, caught the light flashing like a countdown timer on how long she'd be allowed to exist at that table. "All right," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I've got it." And with that, she moved tray in hand, shoulders squared, lips drawn into her polished, professional smile. A single mother, a former art student, walking straight toward the hungriest shark in tech, clinging to hope it would pay for her daughter's asthma meds. Clara approached table 6, the smile fixed on her lips like a delicate mask. Julian Croft sat there, eyes glued to his phone screen. His thumb moved swiftly, mechanically, as if the entire world around him was just background noise. "Good evening, Mr. Croft," she said softly, politely, like something straight out of the customer service handbook. "I'm Clara. It's a pleasure to be serving you tonight." No response, not a nod, not a glance. Just the faint beep of him hitting send on an email. Clara kept smiling. "We have a wonderful selection of wines. Your best bottle?" Julian cut her off, eyes still on his phone. "Now." She nodded gently. "Yes, sir." She turned to retrieve the wine, feeling hollowed out, as if just those 2 lines had already wrung her dry. But that was only the prelude. When she returned with the most expensive Bordeaux from the cellar, Julian finally lifted his eyes from the screen. Not to look at her, but to inspect the label. "Acceptable," he said flatly. "At least you didn't insult me with a Pinot." Clara uncorked the bottle and poured. Her hands were steady, but her palms had begun to sweat. She reminded herself, "It's not about him. This is for Lily. Our special tonight is—" "Don't bother." Julian interrupted again, this time looking her directly in the eyes. There was no emotion there, just a raw, unfiltered contempt. "I want the Kobe steak, medium rare, no garnish, no fancy sauces, and bring it out in 10 minutes. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "My time's worth more than this entire restaurant," he added, like it was just a fact. Clara stood still for a second, spine straight as a rod, eyes still gentle, as if none of it had hit her. She nodded. "I'll get your order to the kitchen right away." Then she turned and walked away. No rushing, no sighing. But inside, every nerve in her body stretched tight to the point of snapping. First strike ignored her greeting, second shut down the wine suggestion, third mocked her service to her face. She pushed open the kitchen door tray, held firm in her grip. But beneath the tray, her fingernails were digging into her palms. "It's just a role," she whispered. "A part I have to play until the curtain falls." But deep inside her, something had sparked. Not tears, not fear. Fire. A small flame smoldering, waiting for the right moment to ignite. 10 minutes later, the Kobe steak was served. Clara placed the plate on the table herself. The meat, rich brown with a subtle red sheen, was seared for a second. No garnish, no greens, nothing extra, just as requested, minimalist, expensive, perfect. Julian picked up his silver fork and knife and cut a square piece with precision. He chewed slowly, deliberately, then set the fork down with a click sharp as a door slamming shut. You call this medium rare. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He said it just loud enough for the two nearest tables to hear. Clara stood upright, one hand resting lightly on her service cloth. I sincerely apologize. If you're not satisfied, I can. No, Julian interrupted again for the fourth time. This time, his voice was honed like a well-sharpened blade. The problem isn't the steak. He looked up. His eyes were cold as a midnight lake, still and merciless. The problem is incompetence. Clara didn't flinch. Her expression didn't change. But somewhere in her chest, a door swung open. And behind that door was Lily. Was every sleepless night spent monitoring her breathing? Was every penny scraped together? Was every missed art class, every dream folded into a single hot meal for her child? Julian tilted his head slightly, as if he hadn't yet finished cutting her down. People like you, he said, emphasizing each word, complacent, failed, existing to serve others. You're the reason this society can't move forward. A heavy silence dropped over Aurelia like a weighted blanket. No more clinking cutlery. No more background piano. Even the ventilation system seemed to go mute. Clara could hear the blood rushing in her ears, could feel the pounding of her own heartbeat, like a hammer. You have no value, Julian finished. You're just part of the scenery. And that's when it broke. Not the plate, not the wine glass, something inside Clara. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she simply stood there still like stone. But her eyes had changed. No longer soft, no longer evasive. Her gaze was sharp now, like shattered glass, fixed on the man who had just peeled away the final layers of her dignity. Everyone had frozen, holding their breath, waiting to see what she would do. A slap, a defiant word. Now Clara remained exactly where she was. But what flared inside her was fire, and fire, when left unchecked, can burn down an entire room. Clara didn't speak right away. She stood there surrounded by a forest of eyes fixed on her. Some were curious, some frowned, and a few held sympathy, like they had just witnessed a crash, and she was the victim who hadn't yet realized how badly she was hurt. But Clara knew. She knew exactly where she'd been torn open. Her hand loosened, and the service cloth slipped to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. No one dared to breathe. Julian Croft remained seated, spine straight, a smug look on his face, like he had just taught a stray dog a lesson. Clara didn't look at him. Instead, her gaze drifted past his shoulder through the floor-to-ceiling glass, where Manhattan's lights glittered like a million living stars. She stared into that view and drew a deep, slow breath. For a moment, Clara was no longer a waitress, no longer a struggling single mom. She was every person who had ever been dismissed, every dream left behind a locked door. She was all the people like you Julian had judged, stepped over, and crushed. She turned back. Her eyes met his. And then calmly, clearly, without the slightest tremble in her voice, Clara said, "Mr. Croft, you can buy this view, you can buy this meal, a breath, but you cannot buy a soul." Silence. No one moved a fork. No one whispered, not even the piano. Somehow the musician in the corner had lifted their hands from the keys. Julian flinched slightly. Maybe he was used to resistance, shouting, tears, people storming off. But this, a single sentence, simple and clean, like an arrow shot straight into the chest. His lips parted, but no words came. And at that exact moment, a soft clap broke the silence, a single round of applause. Not loud, not showy, but crisp, intentional. From the corner of the room, an older woman with silver hair and a pale grey cashmere shawl was clapping. Eleanor Vance. No introduction needed, everyone already knew who she was. Then another clap, another table. Then a young man was at the bar. Then a group of businessmen came nearby. The applause spread like ripples across a still lake after a stone had dropped. No one stood up, but everyone agreed. Julian Croft looked around, suddenly aware he was no longer the center of the room, and for a brief, fleeting second, he seemed smaller. Clara bent to pick up the fallen cloth slowly, then straightened her uniform. Her heart was still racing, but not from fear anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was standing tall, in every inch of her true height. Julian Croft shot to his feet. The luxury leather chair screeched beneath him. His face flushed, not with shame, but with rage. Rage at being upstaged in the center of what he thought was his own stage. He pulled out his wallet and flung a wad of cash onto the table. $100 bills were scattered like dead leaves. "You'll regret this," he growled. "I guarantee it." Then he turned and stormed out, cutting through the restaurant like a hurricane that left behind nothing but strange, heavy silence. Clara stood there, her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't breathe, not from fear, but from the weight of realizing what had just happened was real. She had done what every server had secretly dreamed of doing. But this wasn't a movie, and she was about to lose her job. Matteo walked over, no yelling, no cold stare, just a look. Sad and quiet. "Do you know who he is?" he asked softly. Clara nodded, lips still pressed tight. He seemed ready to say more, but was interrupted by a younger man's voice behind them. "Excuse me," the man said, thin frame plaid shirt, holding up a phone. "I recorded everything. Didn't mean to, but I think the world needs to see this." Clara turned around. She didn't know what to say. Deny it, approve it, object. But he was already gone, phone in hand, typing furiously. 30 minutes later, Twitter, hashtag can't buy a soul. A 45-second video, no edits, no effects. "You can buy this view, you can buy this meal, but you cannot buy a soul." Beneath the video, hundreds of comments, then thousands. "The real Micah J. This woman is my hero. Give her a damn medal. Can't buy a soul. Grace in heels. She should be fired. The customer is always right. Techie now. Somewhere a PR team is having a panic attack." Clara sat in her tiny Queen's apartment. The kitchen light was still on. The room was quiet, except for the faint, wheezy breathing of Lily sleeping in the next room. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Alerts, mentions, missed calls. She didn't touch it, just sat there, head in her hands. The world was calling her a hero. But the fridge held only a single carton of milk. Rent was 3 days overdue, and Lily's inhaler was down to half a dose. She didn't cry, but her cheeks burned. They called her brave, but how many pills can bravery buy? She sat there caught between two worlds, one a storm of internet praise chanting her name, and the other, true silence, an empty fridge, a rent envelope, and a little girl who'd need her fully present come morning. Monday. Rain fell steadily. Clara stood outside Aurelia, her thin coat clinging to her back like a second skin. In her hand, a paper bag carrying her personal belongings, some notebooks, a pen, and Lily's taped-up drawing. She'd been fired. No argument, no thank you, just a short email. "Thank you for your time. We've decided to terminate your contract to protect the restaurant's image." Protect the image, Clara repeated in her mind as if she were a stain to be wiped clean. A flaw outside the frame of elegance. Rain slashed past the awning. She stood still, No umbrella, no movement, just empty. A car horn behind her. A black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Inside sat an older woman, silver hair, neatly pinned back, elegant in a slate-grey ensemble. Her eyes held the kind of quiet that comes from surviving more than one kind of war. "Miss Evans," she asked, her voice soft as silk, but with something beneath it that couldn't be refused. Clara nodded. Before she could say a word, the driver stepped out and opened the door. The penthouse apartment of Mrs. Vance felt like another world, quiet, warm, with the gentle scent of mint in the air. They sat across from each other in a room with a real fireplace, not one of those fake electric ones. Mrs. Vance placed a cup of tea in front of Clara. No pressure, no explanation. Then she began to speak. "My husband used to be like Croft," she said, eyes fixed on the fire. "Brilliant, ruthless, believed money could buy everything. And he did buy many things, shares, power, silence. But never love, never a soul." Clara stayed quiet, lips pressed together, hands wrapped around the teacup for warmth. She'd heard stories like this before, but not in a voice like hers. "I spent my whole life trying to undo the harm he caused," Mrs. Vance continued, "but I stayed silent for too long. Until that night. When you stood up, you said what I should have said 30 years ago." Clara shivered, not from the cold, but from being truly seen. Mrs. Vance turned toward her, eyes serious but gentle. "I'm covering all of Lily's medical expenses." Clara opened her mouth to protest, but Mrs. Vance raised a hand to stop her. "This isn't charity. It's a partnership." She slid a folder across the table. "I've just launched a foundation, the Evans Vance Foundation. The mission is to protect service industry workers' rights. They need a voice, someone who's lived their life. I need you." Clara looked at the folder. One corner of the paper was slightly bent, the scent of new paper mixed with warm tea. She didn't sob, but the tears came anyway. Quiet, gentle, like the pressure in her chest, tight for so long, had finally found a way out. For the first time, Clara whispered, "Someone sees me as more than just a woman carrying wine trays." Mrs. Vance smiled. "No, I see a warrior." 1 year later. Clara stood at a podium in a sunlit hall. Her hair was neatly pinned up her navy blue suit, tailored to fit just right, and her eyes shone like someone who had learned to live beneath the spotlight without blinking. Behind her, the words read, "Evans Vance Foundation, dignity is not optional." She took a deep breath, not to steady herself, but to fully take in the moment. "Someone once asked me," she began, voice clear and steady, "if I regretted saying what I said that night, in a luxury restaurant, to a powerful man." She smiled. The stage lights caught the glint of her simple, elegant earrings. "I don't regret it, because sometimes one sentence doesn't just change an evening, it can change a life." Applause followed, not thunderous, but strong, enough to carry her forward. In the front row, Lily, now healthy, her hair in pigtails, was waving at her mom. On her dress was a small logo, a heart embracing a server's apron. Clara looked at her daughter, then back at the crowd. "It's time we stop treating kindness as a luxury, stop making the invisible stay invisible, and start building a world where every person, no matter what job they hold, is treated with the respect they deserve." At that same moment, a news ticker ran across a hallway television screen. "Julian Croft resigns as CEO of Ethelred Analytics amid pressure from shareholders and the public. Sources say he has donated a large portion of his fortune to labor organizations." Clara didn't mention his name. She didn't need to. The world remembers what it wants. and she had chosen what she would help build. That night, in a modest Brooklyn apartment, Clara stood on the balcony, hands wrapped around a cup of hot cocoa. Lily sat on the floor inside, coloring a drawing that read, "You can't buy a soul." In the distance, the Manhattan skyline blazed. Clara used to see this city as a fortress she'd never break into. Not anymore. Now she wasn't standing outside the gates. She was in it, not to serve it, but to help redefine it. She leaned against the railing, closed her eyes, and a soft breeze brushed through her hair. And then she smiled. "This city never sleeps," she whispered. "Good. Neither do I anymore." If Clara's story moved you, if you've ever been dismissed, ever fought in silence, or ever stood up for what's right, even when you were scared, follow Toch's story. We tell real stories about real people who are brave, kind, and refuse to let anyone else define their worth. Subscribe so you don't miss the next journey, because sometimes one sentence really can change everything.